Good morning, everyone. Today I will be presenting to you my speech about the importance of preserving local languages. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Richard. I'm from Science 4 with the student number of 30. Apa yang seharusnya kita lakukan untuk melindungi bahasa daerah tersebut? Dan apakah bahasa daerah tersebut masih digunakan sampai sekarang? Kebanyakan bahasa daerah di Indonesia digolongkan dalam rumpun bahasa Austronesia dan bahasa daerah yang lain ke dalam rumpun bahasanya sendiri-sendiri. Namun, langkah yang dilakukan oleh pemerintah Indonesia untuk melindungi bahasa daerah tersebut masih terasa setengah-setengah. Dalam pidato ini saya akan menjelaskan kenapa. First, let's talk about the positives. Languages are being taught at school in a mandatory curriculum. That's the first step to the right direction. That way, everyone should be able to speak it fluently. But that might not always be the case for all languages in this country. Remember how I said there were 718 languages in this country? We're not going to have 718 separate curriculums just to teach each and every single one of those languages. Besides, Indonesian language had been chosen as the common spoken language or lingua franca for those people. Everyone uses Indonesian because we're not going to be able to communicate purely by relying on those local languages. It is an important part of our daily life. So, should we all just speak a single language? I don't think so. Every language has its own stories to tell. Each language is unique in its own rights. We can't just abandon those languages for the sake of our ease of communication. Okay, now let's talk about the government's effort at preserving those languages outside the school. The government's effort to preserve local languages outside school is very minuscule. I live in Central Java, which means the local languages here is Japanese. Not only that, the city I live in, Surakarta, is basically the center of the Japanese culture, the other city being Yogyakarta. There are around 84 million Japanese speakers worldwide. Now, you might think that living in the center of the most spoken language in Indonesia would mean that you can see those languages everywhere you look, right? Well, not really. The government of Central Java does put some signs written on Javanese script, but those signs are littered with mistakes as if a non-Japanese wrote them on a cheap dollar store computer. Remember what I said? Javanese script, not the Javanese language. You see, I said that because many street signs, they just translate those street signs into the Japanese script, which means that they do more transcribing than translating. And besides, road signs and marking, you can't see any trace of Japanese being used elsewhere. It's not fair if you talk about the effort made by the Indonesian government without first seeing how the world handles local languages. The countries we'll be comparing is India and China. Both of those countries are the biggest and most diverse countries in Asia. There are 3 notable autonomous provinces in China: Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, and Tibet, each with its own local languages. India is a federal country. Therefore, each state has its own government who work differently to protect those local languages. In India, everywhere you go, based on where you are, you will see local languages still being preserved. For example, in Tamil Nadu, the state where most Tamils in India live, you can see the Tamil script everywhere you look. Likewise, you can also hear Tamil language being spoken there also. In China, the situation is not that much different. Every shop in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Inner Mongolia are required to have their respective local languages on them. You can also see those languages being written on street signs. In Inner Mongolia, even the school curriculum taught students in Mongolian. The difference between those countries and Indonesia is that in those countries, those local languages seems more useful. You can actually use your language skill to live your life even when you don't speak the common official language, something which is much harder to do in Indonesia. Now let's compare our curriculum to those countries. In India and China, local languages are being taught in their respective script or writing systems. In Indonesia, however, local scripts are being taught, but only to a very limited degree. In India and China, the locals from any group of age can properly read signs written on their native languages, using their respective scripts. In Indonesia, old people had lost their ability to write and read those scripts. Not only that, but younger generations can't read those scripts fluently, even though they're taught in schools. A few languages had made recoveries and started using their scripts again, such as the Sundanese language. But that's just a few successful stories compared to the many Indonesian languages which had lost its scripts, such as the Kerinci language. Many Indonesian languages lost their script in favor of the common Latin alphabet during the Japanese rule over Indonesia. All of those scripts are now facing a much bigger issue. The world is going digital. Everyone writes with their keyboard, not their pens or pencils. And what makes typing on computer possible is that the script they're typing in had a specifically assigned code so that they can be typed without interfering other languages or script. That is not the case with many Indonesian scripts. The Lampung script, despite being an important script in the province of Lampung, does not have a code assigned to it. Therefore, till this day, you can't type the Lampung script. Even then, not all of those assigned codes can be read by the computer. That's because those codes will later be translated into a specific image, such as the code U plus 0061 will be rendered as the lowercase a on most devices. That's what makes typing in foreign scripts possible. The Sundanese and Balinese script, despite being the most common languages in Indonesia and despite having its own assigned code, still has no support on Windows, which means that even if you type that, if you're using a Windows to read that, it will come out as a box, rendering it unreadable. Many languages in Indonesia are still in a state of danger as there are little to no preservation done by the government. Not all languages in Indonesia have an easy, readily available online dictionary, which is a problem for the native speaker of those languages who migrates to the Java island. The native speaker of those languages usually lives on places with not a lot of economic opportunities. In search for a better life, they would move into a more populated places with a lot more jobs and higher wages. Living in a foreign place with nobody having a common language with you sounds like the best scenario to cause a language loss on someone. These people need easily accessible dictionaries to prevent their native languages from going extinct over time. It takes a lot of effort to preserve that many languages. The main problem with the current state of language preservation in Indonesia is that no matter if your native language has a lot of speakers or not, it still feels as if the government hasn't done enough to make learning those languages feels worth it. Sampai sekarang, hal terbaik yang bisa kita lakukan untuk melestarikan budaya Indonesia dalam hal bahasa daerah adalah dengan belajar bahasa daerah tersebut. Belajarlah selagi masih ada waktu. Budaya-budaya daerah seharusnya dilindungi dan dilestarikan sampai sekarang ini. Apabila kita melakukan perubahan-perubahan kecil yang berharga, kita akan dapat mendorong perubahan besar yang akan membawa dampak yang nyata dalam kehidupan kita. Dan kita akan dapat melindungi budaya daerah dari ancaman hilangnya budaya. So that was my speech for the topic of preserving local cultures. Thank you for your attention.